Be Hero presents Sheroes.
Hi everyone, Alicia here,
And Amy.
and we are asking the so-called heroes to step aside for a moment so that we can give the Sheroes their turn in the spotlight.
Yes, you heard right. Welcome to Sheroes, a podcast by Be Hero Media.
So just sit back because it's time for the real game changers to show you how it's done.
This episode is not part of our Olympic mini-series. You might remember 2 weeks ago when we spoke about Liz Parkinson, we promised we'd be doing another shark diving episode. This week is our second episode. The reason for this second episode is because a new shark documentary was just released on Disney Plus on July 23rd with National Geographic's called Playing with Sharks. We highly recommend that you watch it. It is fantastic.
And I think it's such a good title because you take one of the scariest animals in the ocean and you play with them. It brings awareness to them, this movie, and teaches you that maybe they aren't as scary as you initially thought.
Yeah, they aren't as evil or monstrous. Now, I'm not sure I would consider it spoilers talking about events from a documentary, but just in case you're concerned about that, we heavily discuss content from the documentary. So if you want it unspoiled, I would definitely take a break from this episode and go watch it. I think it's just over an hour and a half.
Now, as you probably know, we are one of several Be Hero shows. However, what you might not know is that the first show created by Be Hero Media, it's called Be Hero Fights, they just released their 50th episode last week, and they took some time to discuss the topic of cutscenes. And while generally I agree with their assessment of them, this movie, Playing with Sharks, did recycle footage from the past 50 or so years to produce this movie, and in this case we felt that the footage was appropriate for the message and story they were trying to tell. We recommend you check it out and give us your feedback on what you thought of the movie as well as the recycled footage. Most of the source material we are using from this episode comes from that movie, though we might also reference the shark documentary that Chris Hemsworth released, since he spends some time with our Shero in his documentary.
Now that is probably the longest non-introduction we've ever had. So who are we going to talk about today?
Well, this week we are going to talk about Valerie Taylor.
Until recently, I'd never heard of her before. However, I have seen some of her work, and I think it's safe to say that you also have seen some of it. Even if you haven't seen it, I imagine that you're at least familiar with the movie Jaws, which we're going to talk about for a little bit as we discuss her life's work, and also where she started and where she is now.
So if you had never heard of her before, how did you hear about her?
Well, if you listened to our previous episode, you might remember that we mentioned that we're scuba certified. So I was looking for an excuse to talk about a scuba diver. And since Shark Week was coming up at the time, I thought I could kill two birds with one stone. And talk about someone for Shark Week. I found her name among some other very noteworthy scuba divers. And I was planning on actually, discussing with you about doing her for Shark Week, but then when I saw that she was releasing this documentary on July 23rd, I knew we would be able to produce a better episode if we waited until after the documentary was released. And then we could use it for our source material. And let me tell you, I think this documentary delivers.
Well, I'm excited. Let's talk about her.
Growing up, she had polio and lost the ability to walk. She was being cared for in some hospital that wouldn't let her leave until she was able to walk.
She hated it so much, but while she was there, she read many adventurous books and wanted to go on adventures herself. Eventually, she regained the ability to walk and was released to go home.
I think that, like the people she read about in the stories, she was able to go on those adventures. I don't know that much about polio, so I actually just looked up on the World Health Organization website just to get a little bit more information, because I was curious, like with her losing the ability to walk or being paralyzed temporarily. I was curious, how common that was. So what I found out is 1 in 200 infections lead to irreversible paralysis, and among those, 5 to 10% die when their breathing muscles become immobilized.
So it doesn't really say how often they got paralysis and it went away. I'm guessing it was either very uncommon, which is why they didn't mention it, or it was so common that they didn't mention it.
Yeah, that's what I'm guessing too.
But either way, I think it is incredible that she was able to overcome this and eventually become a champion spearfisher, then transition to shooting the underwater life on camera.
I think it's incredible. As a young woman, there was this big hype about spearfishing. In fact, it's still a thing today, but not the way that the documentary describes it. It just kind of shows how, everybody's going and they're just catching like tons of fish this way. But I mean, nowadays, while it is still a thing, you're not going to see it in the same way. She was one of very few spearfisher women, and she described how she would hunt the fish, and then she would come to know and understand them through this process. And she was so good at it that she became a champion. I can't remember, but I think she actually won the first time. So maybe saying became a champion is not quite accurate. I mean, she just
Reigning champion.
She mastered it rather quickly.
Yep. Well, there's this book I once read. I think it's called Free Play. When you talk or dance or sing with someone or harmonize or, play a musical instrument, you and the other person or people involved in the scenario create your own language. Now, you might be thinking if you are speaking with someone, you are already speaking the same language. I don't remember the book well enough to refute that. But when you are dancing, that is a language as well. You and your partner or your team have your own story or language to tell. Maybe you are a solo dancer and you have your own language. Other people can watch and understand some of it, but they aren't getting the whole message. They're only getting one side of the story, and that's the side they can see, but they can't feel. Like when I do ballroom dancing, and when I dance with them, like I can feel them leading me and I feel them taking me certain directions. And the audience, they can see it, but they can't feel it, and they don't fully know what's happening. For them, it's a little bit like magic. And I think that Valerie is like this with the fish and the sharks. I think she and the sea creatures created their own language together that allowed them to have fun and explore together. I also think that this helped her to overcome her own fear of sharks or scenarios with sharks because, as we will mention later, she did have some hesitation with sharks, even though she is still trying to change the narrative.
Yeah, I actually think it's kind of funny that, you're talking about this book, Free Play, and the title of this documentary is Playing with Sharks. So kind of interesting, I think you gave like a nice perspective about that.
The title actually made me think of this book.
During one of her spearfishing dives, she actually ended up shooting a shark with her spear gun. At the time, she didn't think anything of it, and there was no one to tell her not to. In fact, she likely would have been encouraged to kill it, and that was the only shark she ever killed. She continued spearfishing for a while, and she also took up underwater photography.
She met her husband through spearfishing. He was the men's champion, and they were this awesome duo. And for this episode, we are primarily focusing on Valerie, but we can't talk about her without talking about him.
And I think it's worth noting that from what I've gathered, most of the world was frowning on women doing anything even remotely dangerous like scuba diving or going on shark expeditions, but he really saw her as his equal, and I think their success is due in large part to their being equals in their adventures.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. She and her husband thought it would be incredible to film a great white shark. Her husband went on a boating trip to film, and they didn't let her come because she was a woman, and they didn't want women on their boat. But yeah, so the boaters, they attracted sharks to the area, and after they filmed for a little while, they killed all of the sharks that they could get that came to the boat. And her husband was so horrified that he said, "Killing fish upsets me. I'm not doing this anymore." And that's a quote. I don't know if it's a direct quote. It's her quoting him.
After that, they put their spears down and they only shot them with cameras. I think this is so impressive because they were the greatest spearfishers in Australia and maybe the world, and they concluded that they were actually doing harm, and they gave it all up and focused on pictures and films.
I think that is something we can learn from as well. We might have opinions about stuff or learn from stuff, but events in life may help us to have a change of heart. And maybe it's more appropriate to leave behind old points of view or old habits that no longer fit these new beliefs.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, if something is no longer fitting with how we feel, then it's time to move on and make a change. After giving up spearfishing, they were just two of a very select number of people that were doing underwater photography and filmography. She and her husband were out there shooting the sea and the wildlife with a little bit of a scare factor to it for television. And one thing it doesn't really say is if it really was just the two of them or if they had a team. The way they describe it, it sounds a lot like it was really just the two of them out there adventuring with their cameras. But what do you think? Did they have a team of filmographers or was it just them?
I think it does say, and it was just them. They were out there having fun making films and taking pictures, and they were trying everything. The documentary that we watched, it shows her picking up these giant crabs and playing with these eels, and they were just out there having fun. This was their passion.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And since it was such a new field, I think they had a lot of freedom to do things that now we might say you shouldn't do, but at the time nobody knew, and they're just doing the best they could with what they knew.
But they also taught us a lot because they were playing with the sea life.
Absolutely. And I love that they followed their passions and made a living doing what they love. I don't know if they made a lot of money or not, but it seems like they were happy and had what they needed and even what they wanted.
There's this fun story where some fishermen recommended a location that has a lot of sharks. So they got a lot of dead fish as bait and went for filming.
The next year, they came back and the sharks were waiting for them because they recognized their boat. And I think it's kind of cute, like they were friends with these sharks.
Yeah, it is kind of cute. The sharks were so excited to eat fish that they were willing to do whatever Valerie directed them to do to get food.
She had this awesome shot in mind, and after several attempts, she was able to teach the shark to swim around this reef for fish.
It ended up being a really good shot. From her experience working with sharks, she said, they learn faster than you can teach a dog.
Now, I've never worked with a shark before, so I can't say if that's true or not. Training dogs is challenging, but without doing both, I can't speak to the challenges of sharks, so I'm going to have to take her word for it.
Because of their works with sharks and other marine life, they were invited to help with the filming of the project Blue Water White Death.
They found a large dead well that sharks were feeding on, and they were hoping that a great white shark would show up, and from what I can remember, there were great whites that showed up, and they decided that it would be better if they filmed it outside the cage.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't this the first time anyone really dove with sharks? Or I should say intentionally dove with sharks?
So I don't know. I tried looking it up, and I can't say for certain that it was, but it definitely was a very groundbreaking experience where only a couple people in the world had ever done it, and certainly this was an incredible experience.
To give themselves the best chance of surviving swimming outside with the great whites, they watched the sharks for a while. They saw that the sharks would first bump into something with their nose before taking a bite, so they figured the sharks would bump them with their noses before they bit, and they could essentially shove it away. She had a stick, and everyone else had a pretty sturdy camera.
Several sharks did swim up to them, and they bumped them with their sticks and cameras, and the sharks eventually accepted them as part of the pack. Can you imagine, like, it just accepted as part of the pack? It just sounds like, you're with wolves, and I guess it kind of is like being with wolves underwater.
Yeah, I wonder if anyone's done a comparison study of both and how similar or different it might actually be.
Yeah.
So when they made the decision to film out of the cage, they thought they were going to die. So they were pretty excited that they lived to climb back onto the boat. They also had newfound knowledge about sharks that no one else knew.
But can you just imagine doing something and you don't know if you're going to survive? I think it's amazing that she did it, but I'm curious, what was it that actually got her and the others to take that risk?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they definitely observed the sharks, both at the time of the dive and previous dives with sharks. And I think they just must have gotten some kind of idea what was happening. And I don't think they would have taken the risk if they thought there was no chance at survival.
Yeah, maybe. I know she said that she thought she was going to die. Maybe she just thought that if they did survive, that the film would be amazing. Or maybe she just thought the experience was worth the risk.
My favorite thing about this is that a lot of what we know about sharks today is because these two people decided to try, to be brave, and as the title of the documentary says, play with sharks.
Watching this video, I was actually less afraid of sharks than I was of some of the dangerous animals on land, such as wolves that we mentioned before.
Or bears.
Or tigers. The way she talks about them, you can tell that she loves them and she is not afraid.
After that film was released, it inspired Peter Benchley to write the novel Jaws.
Have you seen the film Blue Water, White Death?
Yeah, I saw it for the first time last year. I have to say, it's by far the best shark movie.
To be sure we're on the same page, are you talking about Jaws or Blue Water, White Death?
Oh, I thought we were talking about Jaws. I haven't seen Blue Water, White Death.
Yeah, I haven't either, but I think we're going to have to watch it. I find this hard to believe, but IMDb says it's a documentary.
Yeah, well, I have no idea.
I have to see it just to find out, because that's not the impression I got.
Someone at Universal Pictures must have read the book Jaws and liked it. They asked Valerie and Ron if they thought it would make a good film, and they said it would. They were brought in on the project to help with working with the sharks and the filming.
After the film was released, the public's opinion of sharks turned decidedly against them.
And by them, you mean the sharks.
Yeah, people started to hunt sharks almost like a rite of passage into manhood.
She and her husband were devastated.
They began touring the country, teaching about sharks and explaining that the movie was fiction and sharks aren't really like that.
To this point, we have been largely giving something of a narration of the movie for all of you listeners. I want to change track a little bit. What are some reasons you believe she's a shero?
I think what makes her a shero is when she saw the error of her ways, she changed and did everything she could to make it better.
Yeah, we have two examples of this that we mentioned earlier. She no longer hunts fish or spearfishes them, and after making Jaws and discovering that it was harmful to sharks, she went about to change people's views of sharks. She wanted to make shark fans, or, make people fans of sharks. And I think she did manage to do this. I know that my opinion changed after learning about sharks through scuba diving, which I believe was largely due to her influence in the scuba diving world, that the whole scuba diving community, changed their views on sharks, which eventually led down to us when we started scuba diving.
Yeah, I think so. The gray nurse shark is the first shark that was protected, and that is largely because she wrote a lot of letters to various people asking them to protect this shark. I think she wrote to some congressmen as well, and politicians.
Maybe even a few celebrities. I don't know that one for sure, but she might have.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you mentioned about the gray nurse shark. I definitely wanted to mention that. I am sure that she wasn't the only one working to protect them, but due to the many efforts of her and others, they are protected now, which is something to be celebrated.
Yeah, and she didn't even stop there. Many sharks are being killed for their fins. I think it's for shark fin soup or something like that is what they're being killed for. And she climbed onto a boat where they were finning sharks and took photos. She wanted there to be evidence of what happened to all the sharks when the day finally comes that people start asking where they all went.
She and her husband dedicated their whole lives to shark conservation, and I think that is admirable. She is still diving and fighting for sharks today.
And in appreciation for all of her hard work protecting sharks and other marine life, we wanted to award her the Marine Life Protector Award.
If we are somehow lucky enough to have Valerie listening to this episode and you want us to send you the award, you can send us a personal message, or what do they call that? PM?
Private message?
Yeah, private. That's what I meant to say. And we will send it to you.
All right, so we're going to start wrapping up now. So where in the media can we find her?
So we have Playing with Sharks, the movie that we've been mainly focusing on for this episode.
You can also see her work on Jaws.
She's in a new movie with Chris Hemsworth, Shark Beach. This is another documentary, and I'm pretty sure that she does some of the filming for that documentary.
And she also has helped with various movies, both filming and also with working with sharks and underwater animals.
And then Valerie Taylor isn't in this book, but since I referenced it, I thought I should let you know more about it. The book I referenced earlier, Free Play, I went and looked to see, who wrote it, and in fact that it was called Free Play. It's written by Stephen, I have no idea how to say this, Nakmanovich, maybe? I think it's a phenomenal book, and I would recommend it to anyone.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed our show and want to get to know more Sheroes, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, if you think someone would enjoy this show, be sure to share and help them get to know new Sheroes weekly. We can be found on Facebook at BeHero Media and Twitter at BeHero Media.
And to women and girls the world over,
Be brave.